Hello everybody, welcome to my session. My name is Matt Davies. I'm a brand and culture strategy business consultant, and it's my privilege today to speak to you about brand relevance. Kudos to Paul Ince and the team as well for the great event they're putting on. Thank you so much guys for allowing me to spend some time with you today. Now, what I want my session to really be about is a really practical workshop on how to pivot to stay relevant in a post-corona world. We've been hit hard, haven't we? Particularly in some sectors, particularly in hospitality, retail. We've been hit really hard. And I think as marketeers, we sometimes fall into the trap of kind of like throwing up our arms when we're in these situations and kind of like just kind of accepting that, well, this is our fate, right? We're not relevant anymore. Oh, well, that's that. But I don't think we should be like that. I think there's things that we can do to change businesses. And as marketeers, we're in an awesome position, a great position to strengthen and to help businesses innovate and change and pivot in a new direction. Now, that's what we're going to be talking about really, because we're in unprecedented times. Really, we're sailing on these corona seas, and these are uncharted territories. And I think what a lot of businesses have been doing is steadying the ship, is making sure that, you know, we've had to deal with things like furlough, we've had to deal with business grants and that kind of stuff. And we're now starting to see whether or not we can survive, you know, let alone thrive. And so when we're looking at this as businesses, sometimes we realize, well, you know what, we might have to chart a new course here. But how do we do that? How do we do that as a business? You know, it's not easy to do. We're not used to doing it perhaps in the radical ways that are needed. And that's what this talk is about. I hope I'll be able to add some value to you today, whether you're kind of a marketing person working in an agency and you're looking to help your clients, or whether or not you're a marketing person or a leader within a business who's keen to kind of make sure that your business not only survives, but also thrives into the future. I'm hoping there'll be something in here for you all. Now, what we're going to be talking about is really going to be split into three. We're going to talk quite heavily around some key business principles. And I hope they'll be helpful to you. Hope you find them interesting and concepts which help clarify and simplify perhaps some of the complexities of some of the things that we are having to face. And then based and predicated on the back of those principles, I'm going to share with you a process which I'm hoping you'd be able to deploy pretty much immediately in your work, in your businesses, in your brands, to create these new offerings, these new directions for your customers. And they can be as radical or as simple as needed. But yeah, it'll be a practical wheel that you can go through. I call it the innovation wheel of process. And then finally, we're going to sum up and draw out some lessons right at the end. So that's what we're going to hopefully do. I'm looking forward to spending this time with you. Thank you for joining me, and I hope this sounds interesting and exciting for you. So let's start off with some principles. Now, I always like to start in any sort of talk or anything like I do like that with some definitions, because you know I talk a lot about brands. And that kind of concept can be quite elusive and mean different things to different people. I think it's quite ironic that brand has a bit of an identity crisis, right? So when we talk about brand, to the average person on the street, you know, most people would sort of think of that as, well, that's your logo, maybe some fonts and some colors, right? That's maybe one definition. In marketing circles, I think often we talk and think about marketing a brand as kind of more of awareness campaigns, right? Where there's not a specific ROI or a specific return to a sale, but it's just general awareness. And we're measuring our brand marketing in terms of awareness, impressions, rather than clicks and conversions, that kind of thing. But I don't think any of those definitions are big enough, to be frank. My definition of brand is this: the meaning that people attach to you and your offer. That's what your brand is. It's your reputation, if you like. It's the gut feel that people have when they come across anything that you put out there. It's, as Jeff Bezos says, the CEO of Amazon, he says, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's what your brand is. Now, as marketeers, that definition hopefully isn't alien to us, but as a business person, as people on a board, that's kind of scary, because what it says is that we don't really own the brand. It exists in the hearts and the minds of the people that come into contact with it. It exists it's what they say it is. It's what our audience, our tribe says it is. It's not actually what we say. We can say whatever we want, but actually that's not relevant, because what really matters is what our customers say. So that approach is quite interesting. It gives perhaps a different perspective on things. It means that we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the customer. So as we go through our session today, you'll see that I'm very keen on that approach. The brand is the meaning that people attach to you and your offering. And branding, which is in the game that I'm in, the game that you're in, is the management of meaning. And marketing, of course, is a huge kind of player in managing how customers see a brand. But that's not the only kind of part of a business. I would say a lot of the business should be involved in branding, from how people, the decisions that are made in terms of sourcing products and supply chain, through to HR and how we recruit, train, encourage, reward our people so that they are on board with what we stand for, through to innovation, how we're creating new products and services, and all of that stuff. That all is connected to the brand. We're managing the meaning. And of course, the first step, of course, is to define that meaning in the first place. Define who we're here to serve and why it matters. So branding is a big subject. Obviously, I'm going to try and keep to it in the context of marketing because we're here in Marketing Light, but it does branch off. And I think it's important that we mention that at this stage. In essence, this is how I see it. Consumers or our audience, right? They look at a brand and it makes an impression in their minds because the brand speaks a certain way. It has a tone of voice, messaging, that kind of stuff. It dresses a certain way in its imagery and its fonts and its colors. That is a part of it, but it isn't the key part. Because more importantly, it behaves in a certain way. It pays its taxes or not. It sources its materials from ethical places or not. The brand does things, it gets involved in events or sponsors particular things. It's behaving somehow in a certain way. It does things for us. This one's crucial. It provides a solution. It helps us create an identity. It's doing something for us. And of course, if the brand fulfills on what we expect it to do, we really love it. If it exceeds it, we really, really love it. But if it doesn't do what we expect it to do, then then we don't like it and we get annoyed. And finally, the last one there is that it exists on the basis of a set of beliefs. And in commoditized marketplaces, that one can really be the differentiator to help a customer choose you over your competition if you are very clear on what you stand for. Now, anyway, all of those things come together in our audience's mind, and ultimately they create some meaning about us. Now, I'm going to put something up on the screen right now, and I hope you don't like kind of breathe a great sigh of pain, because basically I know that this is overly used and perhaps overly simplistic. But I do think there's a couple of interesting things with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which might be perhaps good if we just touch on very briefly, bearing in mind what we've said so far. Because, by the way, the hierarchy of needs, let me just explain that very quickly. Abraham Maslow's theory was that there's 5 key stages to human need, like 5 rungs of a ladder, if you like. And that humans don't move up a rung until the previous rung has been fulfilled. That need has been met. So, for example, you start at the bottom with physiological, which is stuff like food, sleep, drink, that kind of stuff. Once we have that as humans, we move into the next rung where we look for safety. And in the safety rung, what we do then is we look to kind of feel secure, feel like we're not going to be attacked or threatened. And once we feel safe, we then move into the next rung, which is the belonging rung, which is where we look for a community to join. And when we're in our community, we then move into the fourth rung, which is esteem. We look to carve out something that we can remain famous for within that community and get recognition for that thing. And then once we've done that, really we look to the final one, which is self-actualization, which is where basically we don't really mind too much. We've already got esteem amongst the group. So we choose things that really interest and interest us personally. And we have fun and enjoyment from those things. Now, what this current corona crisis has done is it's brought us crashing down as consumers sometimes from the top of this pyramid of needs to the bottom. You remember, like, when the crisis was fully in swing, remember we were really worried about toilet roll and food supply and stuff like that. And some of that feeling has continued on, hasn't it? People feel very insecure. They don't feel safe. They're worried about going into shops, face masks, what to do, how to behave. These things are very much on people's minds. And they're weighing up the risks of going out, of going to a store, of having an experience, of connecting with other people. And obviously they've got used now to being at home. So all of these things are creating massive challenges for brands and the way that people perceive them. Because ultimately, this is what we've probably all faced, and we don't want to face, but we have faced, where the audience perceives our brand as not being relevant. They look at it and they think, this isn't relevant for me anymore. And if you're struggling and if your business is finding it difficult, you may be in this exact predicament. And if so, then this is the presentation, hopefully for you, to help you out. Now, I love this little English proverb, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, which basically means that the primary driving force of change and innovation is a need that needs to be fulfilled. And that's really what we've got to do if we're in that situation as a brand. We've got to think outside the box. What we're doing right now does not work. We've got to try something new. So what I say to you, if you're in that situation, is do not accept your fate. Innovate. A little bit cheesy, I know. But, don't accept your fate. Innovate. We've got to do something new. What we did pre-corona is not going to work. We're in a new world, a new landscape now. Consumers have a different attitude to perhaps what we're offering. So we've got to keep up with that. And remember, the brand isn't what we say it is. It's what the customers think and say about us. It's what they are saying. So I think that is hopefully quite an important distinction for us to make early on. Now, how do we do that? How do we innovate? Now, I'm a big fan of this guy. I'm sure you've heard of him, Peter Drucker, management consultant and kind of guru in the mid-20th century. And he has some interesting things to say about innovation. A lot of his ideas, by the way, have been adopted by modern businesses. And a lot of his thinking is in a lot of textbooks that business students learn at in university. But here's the thing. He says this about innovation. The new has to be organized separately from the old and existing. So what he says is that basically if you've got a lot of people, a lot of brains thinking about the current running of the business, they're always going to prioritize that. There's always going to be firefighting, problems, challenges that come up that always take priority because that's their focus. That's what they're doing. If you want those same people to think about the future, they can't. It's almost like impossible to be able to weigh up the two. So what you have to do is you have to take some of those brains, create a new thing, something that innovates for the future, a skunk works, a way of, a focused group. I call it the superstar SWAT team, a group who are going to focus on next. What's next? So you've got your current company of people thinking about now, but you've got dedicated brains thinking about the new, the next, innovation. And you have to separate the two. Now, I always suggest that, in that team, you keep it multidisciplined. You kind of carve out some time and space for them. You empower them. And there should always be a leader, someone from the leadership team in that, empowering and ensuring that all goes really, really well. there's no point in them running off and coming up with loads of ideas only for people to say, no, that's not going to work. They've got to be empowered. They've got to feel like they can make progress. They've got to be motivated and passionate for really making a difference. So that's what I sort of propose. And as I go through this, you'll see that I'm going to propose a process with a superstar SWAT team. And as kind of a marketing people, you might, if you're in an agency, you might propose this to a client and make sure one of your team are in this SWAT team, running and guiding it. If you're in-house as a marketing leader, make sure you're on that team, right? What is the best way, though, to make things better? Well, I always say design, right? Nothing is improved by accident. Chaos is the absence of design, the absence of intent. So whatever we do, if we're going to do this from a strategic perspective, we need to make sure that we are purposeful in how we approach it. Design thinking is a major buzzword, and I think it's important. It started as a process really in software design thinking, and obviously has been deployed really, really well. I'm going to present to you a simplified or a simple version of that in the process I'm going to share with you a bit later. But it's of huge value for a business. Let me explain why. Perhaps conventionally, traditionally, the way that we would have done things as a business is sort of gone through two stages. One is that we know something. We've been taught something at university. We've gone to business school. We've gone to some conferences. We've gone to some training. We know something. And so we go straight from knowing to deployment, to doing, because that's the way it's always been done. And we then kind of get into just kind of chugging along with that. But that might not be any good. We're now in a new world where what we perhaps learned even a few months ago may not actually be relevant to the current situation because things are changing so fast. So what design thinking does is it adds a new step in this simplified sort of process. We know something, or we think we know something, but instead of just jumping into deploying it, we go into this make stage. Making is all about playing, testing, learning, and verifying what we think we know with our customers, with our audience. Because remember, it's not about what we say, it's what they say. It's about really kind of getting to know, putting ourselves in their shoes and listening to what they have to say. And then once we have it verified on a small basis, maybe a minimum viable product, we then go into doing. We then go into a solution. It allows us to fail fast and fail cheaply, and it allows us to build out new initiatives at a relatively low risk. And most importantly, at a high relevance to our customer base. And that's what I'm going to be sort of talking to you about in just a few minutes. This is the classic, what we call the double diamond, which represents the process. Each part of the diamond represents thinking. So you start with a kind of a discovery phase and you open up your thinking around a problem. What are the problems here? Figure it out. Let's open that up. And then you narrow in and define the problem that you're particularly going to solve. And then you open up thinking in terms of potential solutions to that problem. And you're doing this all the time, by the way, with your customers. So you're figuring it out with them. And then you narrow down on bringing one of those solutions to market. So that's it in a kind of an overview situation. I like to try and keep things simple. I hope it's not too simplistic for you. Obviously, there's a lot of intricacies in all of this. But zooming out, that's kind of what I'm going to be talking to you about in a minute. And the key thing here is that we design with people, not for people. We're not inventing a product and running around the world trying to see who we can find to buy it. We're selecting an audience and we're looking at their goals and challenges and problems, and we are basically looking to help them solve them. We are here to serve a particular tribe. This is a completely different way, perhaps, than conventionally people have looked at business. And as marketeers, we are in a great position to do this effectively and well. We have the data usually on our customer group. We know who our top customers are. We've done the work. But the issue is that their needs have changed. And so we don't, therefore, my suggestion is completely select a new customer group. My suggestion is we go to the customers we have relationships with and we build and we innovate around what they need. The brand is what they say it is, not what we say it is. So let's go out there and work with them. that's my sort of suggestion. We're going to do that. I'm going to propose a way in a minute that is agile. Agile is a lovely buzzword we've heard a lot about. I'm sure some of us on here will be really familiar. If you're not, what is it in its simplicity? It's simply collaboration at speed. Multidisciplined teams, different types of brains, all kind of getting together to solve a problem and iterate on that problem and validate the solution to that problem at speed. Just to kind of highlight that, I think traditionally perhaps this is how we've attacked things as businesses, through what we call a waterfall conventional process, where we'd kind of break up a project into key milestones, and we would then kind of chug along in step one, wait for approval and sign off before we chug into step two, and so on. And who knows how long that can take. But this process, I would suggest, is not what we need at this moment in time. Because what this process does is it produces tons of bottlenecks. Someone goes on holiday, someone leaves and joins another company, we've got to start again. Perhaps the problem we end up finishing solving is not relevant 8 months from now, from when we actually started. So what we need is something quicker, something faster, something more agile, that allows us to what we call swarm on the problem fast and quick. And so I'm suggesting throughout this process more of an agile strategy, where all the brains come together at one time. It's a little bit chaotic. We can put some framework around it, but it's far quicker and allows you to solve problems in a much faster way. And I've kind of, in my work, solved problems perhaps that would take about 6 to 12 months in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks with some of these processes. So there's our principles. We've talked about brand being what other people believe, the audience believes about us. We've talked about being customer-centric, tribe first is how I'd term it, putting ourselves in their shoes. We've talked about radical innovation. We've talked about pivoting, changing course to become relevant. We've talked about our superstar SWAT team and separating that from the day-to-day running of a business. We've talked about swarming, and perhaps one of the last things I wanted to highlight is that if you do this, there's something about deadlines that really help teams focus. Like a hairy, scary deadline monster goes running around, and everybody kind of focuses to make sure they don't get eaten by the deadline monster. So my kind of final suggestion is, if you decide to do this, obviously get everybody on board, make sure everybody's comfortable in the SWAT team, but set yourselves a deadline. Make sure that you are going to hold yourselves accountable to a particular point in time. So there we go. There's our principles. Now, what about this innovation wheel? This is an agile process which I've run a few times, and you can run this as kind of like over the course of a month or a couple of months, or you can run it in a week. It's basically super nimble and super easy to deploy. You may not always follow all the steps exactly, and I'll talk about that as we go through. You might need to jump back and forward. But basically, it allows you to come up with new ideas, customer-centric ideas at pace. So you start off with a discovery phase. You then move into a problemizing phase. You then move into a solutionizing phase. Then into a verification and a verifying phase. And then finally into a planning phase. And if at that point, as you should do, you have a great idea, that drops out of this process and is deployed in the business. And you might have another team that, in the business that are kind of like chugging along, fighting all the fires and making sure everything's going. And their job is to receive that idea and bring it into the processes. But the innovation SWAT team, they keep on going around this process. So you can keep running this on an ongoing basis in a business and never stop innovating. Or you could do it as a 1 or 2 phase kind of thing. Just deploy it as you need it. But it's my gift to you. I hope you'll find it interesting and useful, and it's helpful to you in your particular situation. So we're going to go into step 1, and I'll go through the detail of this and really kind of hopefully make it super practical for you. And as I say, just before I do that, if you run an agency, you might be able to adopt some of this and use it as a service to your clients. If you're in-house, you might be able to propose this to your leadership team in order to really kind of move the business forward in a high energy way. So I hope you find some value in it. So the first one is the discovery phase of the sprint, a discovery sprint, if you like. And really, this is about listening. Remember what we said at the start. The brand isn't what we say it is. The brand is the meaning other people attach to us. And remember as well what I mentioned about designing with people, not simply for people. Don't create the product and run around trying to sell it. Create the customer and work with them to create the products that will help the customer. Different way of looking at it. So you've got to design with the people. You've got to start with the customer, not with the business. We fall into that trap all the time in business. Start with our customer base. Yes, at the moment, they might be looking at us and thinking, you're not relevant anymore. Okay, so how do we pivot to become relevant? Now, I always also like to suggest that people, we don't just go out to customers empty-handed. We come up with some ideas and we share them and we provoke a response. If we created a delivery service, would this be of interest to you? If we pivoted to being online completely, would that be of interest to you? Yes, why? No, why? Find out. These are the key things. We've got to listen in the discovery phase. And as marketeers, right, we've got the data. We understand who the customers are. We understand who they are and how they interact with us. So we're in a great position as marketeers to help kickstart this process. So this is the first sprint, discovery. This is about listening. How does it work? Well, what I would say is we get our SWAT team together. We have a Zoom call, a workshop, if you're lucky enough to meet with people. But you get them together. And what we do is we identify our top customers. And we then, each of us in the team, in the SWAT team, everybody, I don't care if you're the CMO, the CEO, or if you're just kind of in finance and you've also been put on this team, it does not matter. Everybody has to get their hands dirty. And so the task is that everybody goes off and contacts about 5 members of the tribe each. And what you're going to do is you're going to reach out to them and say, look, we're thinking of bringing some new products to market, some new services to market. And as a valued customer of ours, I really would love to just spend half an hour with you on a Zoom call if possible, just to walk through a couple of things with you and really put myself in your shoes, because you're one of our ideal customers. We really value you. Please, could we have some time? Ideally, hopefully, they'll be like, yeah, of course. When do you want to do it? So ideally, everybody would go off and try and do this in a short space of time. Obviously, it depends on your context and the volume that you actually want to do, but I normally suggest about 5 people for each leader. Some of those people will turn you down, but hopefully at least a few will allow you to speak to them. Now, what you want to do is kind of ask some questions about some initial ideas that you might have of improving the business, but you're not really, that's just there to provoke a response. What you're there to do is really listen to their goals and their challenges and their problems. That's what you need to do. So I'd go out and ask, things like, well, what are your current challenges, Larry, Jenny? If we did this kind of thing, would that be of interest to you? If so, why? If not, why? What might be something else that we could help? Maybe something better that you would find helpful from us. What problem could we solve? How are you currently solving this big problem that you've got? What would be unhelpful for us to do for you right now? So what you're doing here is you're taking in information, you're listening to the customers. Remember, it's their perception of you that counts. Then once you have done that, you've gleaned all that information, at a set point, we're going to bring the SWAT team back together and we're going to go through the next sprint, which is problemizing. So this is about focusing in on the problem. We might have identified loads, but which one are we going to go after to solve? And at this point, I absolutely loved referencing this guy, Sakichi Toyoda, right? If you've not heard of him, he's a genius. He's a Japanese inventor and industrialist, and his company eventually became Toyota. And apparently he had this technique, which I think is fascinating, which is very simple. He called it the 5 whys. So whenever a problem came up, he'd ask why, and then whatever the answer to that problem was, he'd ask why again, and he'd ask why 5 times. And what that actually does is it gives you 5 layers to the problem until you actually get to the root cause of the issue. And then if you're really smart as a business, you're able to provide kind of ways, barriers, or solutions to each step of the 5 steps in the process. And then that problem will never happen again, right? So really, really powerful and a really kind of exciting way of solving problems. So I always kind of reference that here because when you're talking to your customers, ask why a lot. Why do they have this pain, this problem and desire? Now, when you've got your SWAT team back together, having asked all those questions and thought about why, it's really important that you cluster the thinking. So get everybody on a Zoom call or in a room, perhaps use an online platform like Mural, which allows you to kind of put post-it notes and everybody can collaborate, or even Google Docs or whatever it might be. Get people to put their findings down. What were the problems? And then the key thing to do collaboratively is cluster these in ideas, in groups of thinking. What you then want to do is try and summarize and do yourselves a favor and simplify the problem that your tribe is currently facing, or the problems they're facing. You might have 3, you might have 20, but for each of the key challenges, I'd suggest that you create what's called a problem statement. And this is one I use. It's quite, hopefully you find it helpful. But basically it goes like this: members of our tribe who are, so then you describe the customer type. So it might be, I don't know, over the age of 70, or a single parent, for example, are experiencing this pain. So it might be, are experiencing anxiety about going into shops, are experiencing this pain of not being able to go on holiday, are experiencing the pain of being having to homeschool and work, whatever it might be. And then this is the key bit to this exercise, and hopefully you've uncovered this in your research, which means that. So what is the negative output of that? Which means that I'm ordering all my stuff online. I'm having to get my neighbor to do my shopping for me. It means that I'm feeling like I'm not a good parent, and nor am I good at my job, because I'm switching between these two things of schooling and trying to go to work. It might mean that a number of negative outcomes. I'm not going on holiday and I'm feeling stressed about that. Whatever it might be. So find out the pain of your customer. Remember, it's what they're feeling and thinking, because this is the foundation then of our next step, which is to find some solutions. So sprint 2 then, define the problem, get your group in the room, organize and categorize the problems, ask why as a team, discuss that, define the problems in the problem statement, and then this is the crucial one: decide on which problem you are going to solve as a superstar SWAT team. That can be hard, right? You can either do it through dictatorship. In other words, the highest ranked person in the room can decide, the CEO or whatever. Or I prefer the method which is more kind of democracy, which is where you could get people to vote on which one they think is most relevant to go after. Always resist in those sessions the urge to come up with the solution straight away, right? Just talk about the problems right now. Make sure that your problem that you've defined is definitely from the research you've done. It's not something the business thinks, it's something you've heard from the tribe. And this is where perhaps if you're not sure about something, you may have to kind of dive back into talking back to the tribe and the customers if you have to verify a bit more. That's okay. This process is supposed to be spongy and flexible. Don't go back through a waterfall process. This is flexible. The final bit here is really important, that on your problem statement, just make sure that it's not too wide. Like the pain is, I'm suffering, basically from the societal effects of COVID. Make sure that you keep it, quite focused, but not too wide. So, I'm finding it hard to work from home and look after the kids would be perfect. That's a key insight, a key thing that you would have heard potentially. So, step 3, solutionizing. This is where it gets interesting, because you've got to call the SWAT team together and you've got to come up with some ideas. Where do great ideas come from? Well, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. He says good ideas come from bad ideas, but only if there are enough of them. So you've got to get creative, got to get all the brains in the room, and we've got to be in a positive situation where we're going to come up with ideas. Now, sometimes I suggest that the team goes off, runs this sprint as individuals, thinks about the problem statement, and then comes up with a number of ideas. And the key thing here is that when we come back together as a team, we need to come with stuff like prototypes, sketches, photos, whatever it might be, mood boards. It doesn't really matter. But the key here is that to illustrate the idea, it's really crucial that we don't just have a few words. It's got to be seen. It's got to be visual. That's where the best ideas come from, because then you can actually spot if there's a problem Or other people can latch onto it and adapt it and tweak it far more easily if there's a way of seeing stuff. So I'm really keen on prototyping as much as possible. We'll build this app. This is what it looks like. On our website, we'll create a new page that looks like this. We'll create a new service, and here are the 7 steps to that service. Whatever it might be, prototype it. Do a storyboard. Walk people through. So when the team comes back together, say, right, I've got 3 potential solutions to our problem. Here's mine. Present them through. Now that can be a long session. Put breaks in if you're doing it online on a Zoom call or Google Hangouts. Make sure though that everybody gets time to speak. And there's a couple of principles here. Make sure that nobody shoots anybody's ideas down, because the enemy of creativity is fear. You want people in this session to be super buoyant, super excited with their ideas. After everybody's presented their ideas, I always suggest some sort of scoring matrix. Here's a very simple one. So you write the idea on the side. Out of 10, what's this value to customers? Out of 10, what is our ease of implementing this? And you might want to think about commercial benefits in there as well. And then add a total up. You can add other things into the columns as well. But it's a great way of everybody aligning and parallel thinking through the solutions that you've come up with in order to select one that you might think is useful. So, solutionizing sprint. Set the group off to create solutions to the problem, create low fidelity prototypes, present them, score each one, and select the top ideas. Now, obviously, you want to keep all of this because you might want to come back round this in the innovation circle and pick up some of the ones that you don't put forward. But for now, remember, no idea is a bad idea. Crazy off the wall ideas are okay at this stage. Volume of ideas is super important, and you want to score them so you can talk it through. Now, you might have 1 or 3 ideas, right? You've got sketches and prototypes. You might want to bring them forward a little bit before this final phase. So you might want to kind of refine them, put it out to a designer or a creative or an artist to sketch it up a bit more. But this is the 4th phase, verifying. It's where we get those ideas and we check in with our audience. So go back out. Everybody takes this, has a little deck or a couple of things to share, and reconnects with the people they spoke to at the start of the process. Again, taking notes. Why is this not relevant? Why is it? Why would it be relevant? Kind of score, as you get everybody back together, then score and review the score in terms of its relevance to the customer. It might change a little bit. But hopefully at the end of verifying it, you'll have a great final winning idea. If you go back out to your audience, by the way, and everyone's like, nah, this is rubbish. This wouldn't add any value to me whatsoever. I'm not willing to pay a penny for it. Then you might need to go back and go back through kind of stage 3 again, the 3rd sprint, to come up with new ideas. But ultimately, hopefully that never normally happens at this stage if you've done your research correctly. Now let's assume we've got a winning idea. We've scored it. Everybody's comfortable with it. We then go into a planning phase. This is where we look at, well, how do we bring this to market, right? Who do we need to kind of get involved? What are the key milestones? How are we going to test it? Maybe we're going to test it with a small group of customers first, maybe even the audience group that we've been talking to. Depends on your context, situation, or whatever. But the key thing here is you deploy it. And this is where you need to put somebody in charge of deploying that. Usually somebody from the main business. Get them and say, we've got this new thing. This is how we see it working. Here are the milestones. We want you to report back in 6 months or 2 weeks or whatever the timescale is you're working to. Hold them accountable to it. And the innovation team goes back off around and creates some new innovations, new ideas, new ways of adding value. And that person reports back into that process as to how it's gone. You deploy it. So that's my sort of suggestion. And you've got to work out who, what, and when. Who's going to do things, what are they going to do, and when are they going to do it by? So map out those milestones, figure out who needs to be involved, set the responsibilities, hold people to accountable, get that plan, get it out there, get going. And as I say, start small. This is the idea, with a minimum viable product. Keep testing, changing it, iterating it, making it better, and deploy it effectively. So that's the innovation wheel. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that useful. I hope you can go off and create some great solutions for your clients within that. Obviously, from a marketing perspective, it gives you a great edge being involved in that room because you intrinsically understand the value proposition to the customer, the problems the customer's facing. So if you happen to be then involved in the tactical marketing of whatever the new thing is, you're in an awesome position to add huge value very quickly to your customers or to your business and your teams if you're in-house. What's next then? Well, there's that wheel. Remember, we start with discovery, listening, problem, what's the problem, solutionizing, what solutions can we think of, verifying that, going into planning and deploying it. Quite simple it would seem to do, very hard to execute unless everybody's pulling together around something like this, a designed process that helps us imagine a better future and get there in a way that is very customer-centric through the power of design thinking. This is, I believe, how we stay relevant. And as I say, you can run this on an ongoing basis throughout time to ensure you're always checking in, listening to your customers to remain relevant. You know, we've talked about the brand. It's all about what they think we are all about. Not what we say, but our collaboration and our way of supplying things that they have attached value to. That's how we're going to make money. It's about them first. It's about innovating for them. It's about designing that process and designing and making and testing it with them. It's about swarming, multidiscipline teams, agile, quick, fast. Everybody sort of adapting and pinging ideas off of each other. And it's about setting ourselves accountable deadlines. What are the benefits of running through that? Well, I'm sure they're quite obvious, but this process is fast, collaborative, high value, and effective. It allows us to build really strong relationships within the teams, and it allows us to be very, very customer-centric. Too often, businesses have too many onion rings before you get to the customer. You've got to break those onion rings down. You've got to get out there. You've got to listen to remain relevant. It's no good kind of sitting back in your ivory tower and complaining that nothing's working and we're not relevant anymore and no one can brief the marketing team effectively anymore because of COVID. Don't accept your fate if you're struggling. Innovate. And this is perhaps how you do it. So thanks so much. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that interesting. I'm Matt Davies. Connect with me on any of my social media. I'm particularly hot on LinkedIn. If you like podcasts, I run a podcast called Just Branding, and I've got a book that's available on Amazon as well. I'm also open to consulting, and I get myself involved in all sorts of interesting business challenges. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that useful, and I wish you all the best. You know, now is the time to stand up. Now is the time for us to think differently and to push the boundaries. Now is the time for us to be more customer and tribe focused than ever before. So good luck and all the very best in your situations. Thank you.